Professional wrestling has a major problem that's not really being discussed, and I thought this would be the perfect time to discuss it, and that is, in fact, the addition of more women's factions. And I don't know if this is a coincidence, but it feels like WWE is starting to pick up on this, but we don't know if there's necessarily a commitment to it. Now, one of the reasons why I even thought of this video is because of WWE and AEW's success of implementing tons of factions in the last few years. Obviously, we saw the success of the Bloodline, and we saw the success of the Inner Circle. We saw the success of the Judgment Day, and we also saw the success of Damage Control, which, by the way, Damage Control is probably one of the most successful women's factions ever in the history of WWE. Now, with that being said, it got me thinking, why aren't there more women's factions? And it's actually something I've been thinking about because it solves a major problem in professional wrestling, which is TV time distribution. It's a little unbalanced. Now, we have seen more women prominently featured in WWE television, but there is still a lot of women who aren't prominently featured. And by having factions, this actually solves that problem because there's a lot of things you can do with a faction that garners TV time for all those involved. Now, for example, Damage Control. Bayley was the leader. Bayley was the leader and was a champion. But when Bayley is feuding with somebody else, not everybody has to have a singles match with Bayley. The other women in the faction are given the opportunity to have singles matches or accompany the person who is having singles matches. And then obviously you have segments where they're all together, maybe where they're not all together. And ultimately what this does is give people TV time and keeps fresh matchups. Basically, it eliminates the need for rematches constantly. Now, I thought about this because WWE has something that they're doing, which we have seen Blair Davenport now align with Isla Dawn and Alba Fire, known as the Unholy Union. Is Blair Davenport officially in the group? We don't know. Will they be branded officially as a group? We don't know. Should they be branded as a group? Absolutely. Also, let's take a look at Katana Chance, Kaden Carter, and Lyra Valkyria. Clearly, there is an alliance there, but they're not branded as a faction. JC Jane and Jasmine Nix aligned with Fallon Henley, but there is no branding for them as an actual group. On the other hand, there was an alliance that was formed, and we saw that with the Pure Fusion Collective, which, by the way, I think it is a silly and stupid name, but Sonya Deville, Shayna Baszler, and Zoe Stark are now a faction. And I like this because ultimately, Sonya Deville's not going to be having singles matches every week. Zoe Stark won't be having singles matches every week, and Shayna Baszler won't be having singles matches every single week. But if they're a group and they're in a feud, which we have seen, it now gives them time to kind of cycle talent for the TV time. So the more and more that I thought about this, I thought about the success of the Bloodline, and I thought of the success of the Judgment Day. And after analyzing both of those two factions, I feel like there's been so many benefits for the people in the faction, as well as for the people that have actually feuded with those factions. Now, at the end of the day, creating stars is actually not that easy as people think. But you can't create stars if you're not given TV time. And to catapult new women's stars, it's important that they do get TV time. And it's very interesting that WWE has done this across multiple factions throughout the years, but that same thinking is not applied to the women's division. And when you look at the women's division, there are a lot of things that are great about them. And yes, we are seeing them get more TV time and more matches and more storylines for just various reasons, right? Like the women are having storylines now where they're not necessarily feuding for the belt, which I have always complained about that. That is something that needed to change, and we have seen that change in 2024. But the way to really elevate the women's division in total will be having more women's factions. And look, there's going to be people in factions that are designed to just simply eat the pinfall, and that's okay. The more TV time you're given, the more opportunity there is for people to really try and get a reaction from fans. And if it doesn't work, it simply doesn't work. But it is better to put them on TV than to not put them on TV and then being given no chance at all. And that's one of the big reasons why I think women's factions actually need to be more of a common thing in pro wrestling. Let's take a look at AEW, for example. The Inner Circle was a great faction, and I absolutely loved what they did initially in the beginning, but eventually it fell apart, and that's okay. Some people benefited from it, some people didn't, but a lot of that reflects on the booking from AEW. The actual thing that people need to pay attention to is that when the Inner Circle was on top, they were truly on top. And if you look at AEW in 2024, you have an alliance right now with Camille Brick and Mercedes Moné. Why isn't AEW building a top faction for Mercedes? Especially because Mercedes has the name value. If you add some other women into their group, it makes a lot of sense. And then on the flip side of that, you have Jamie Hayter, who isn't being used. But why isn't Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker forming their own faction as well? Ultimately, this is going to solve the problem of women not being given TV time, but also it puts women in a very, very massive storyline that is going to garner so much attention. It ultimately becomes undeniable as far as who is the strength of the group and who is the weakness of the group. And you don't want to form factions just for the sake of forming factions, but this is a great way overall to see who is actually really good, who has potential, and maybe who shouldn't be on TV at all. And I think that's one of the big things I've looked at here is like when you look at pro wrestling as a whole, it's only so much TV time that you have, and there's only so many top stars you could potentially have, but you got to do something. You have to do something to think about the future of your television show. And in WWE, like Charlotte Flair isn't on TV, but there's a lot of other women who have stepped up, right? Becky Lynch is no longer on TV, but there's a lot of women who stepped up. But there's also call-ups, for example, like Kiana James. And we see her a little bit, and then we don't see her at all. And then you wonder why Kiana James isn't being given TV time, or you wonder why Kiana James isn't getting a reaction when she's on TV. And the reality is there's not necessarily a plan. But if you look at the women's roster in general, there is room for Kiana James on TV. You just got to find a character that she can align with and create an alliance. Sometimes it's not even about having a faction that's overall branded, but having that also helps because you could in turn make money from it. Look at Damage Control. Damage Control is a very good example of how to do a faction. Bayley was the leader. They told a very long-term story of Bayley being outed as the leader. And now on WWE Raw, Damage Control is actually prominently featured. And then you have to wonder, okay, who's going to assume that role? We know Dakota Kai is injured, unfortunately, so that obviously puts a damper on things. But you have Kairi Sane and Asuka, and look, like you got to just look at the group in general and think, okay, there is some long-term potential even without Bayley being there. And now Dakota Kai is injured. Hey, Dakota Kai being injured, it absolutely sucks. But there's other women in this group where it makes a little bit of sense to push them. I want to see more women's factions in professional wrestling. I genuinely believe it. I genuinely believe this. It would be a good thing overall, 1000%. But also, I want WWE, specifically WWE, I want WWE to look at some of the talent who aren't being utilized. And that should be the first thing that they pay attention to, because the easy solution is, hey, throw them in a group, see if it makes sense. Odyssey Jones wasn't being utilized at all for 2 years on the main roster. Now he's got a storyline with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods and the Final Testament. And what's actually really cool is Odyssey Jones is getting reactions like crazy. Like, this guy is becoming loved. And this is a guy who's relatively unknown. Why isn't that way of thinking being applied to the women's division? That's the big question mark, and that is something that I think should be answered. The solution is definitely factions, but also you can't just do random factions for the sake of doing random factions. And also, I'm going to throw this out there. Pure Fusion Collective is a really dumb name. I really do think it's a dumb name. But hey, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At least you're putting these three women together on TV and it gives them something to do. Shayna Baszler is somebody who I feel like should be on TV all the time, and for some reason she isn't. And I don't understand why. I never really understood why Triple H or Vince McMahon didn't really utilize her the way that she should be utilized. She's a hell of a talent. And if you're worried about, maybe Shayna Baszler doesn't have the best promos, the good news is Sonya Deville is very good on the microphone. So that actually complements Shayna Baszler. Her weakness is now solved by having somebody in her group that could do the talking for her. But these groups always have somebody who is a legitimate threat in a storyline. And that is one of the cool things that I absolutely love about factions. Everybody has a strength, everybody has a weakness, but when you put people together, they complement each other in a way that is super beneficial. I want to see this being applied across the board. Every wrestling company should be doing it. I don't know why it's not being done, but let me know what you guys think. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know.